Welcome to the Writer's Nook. I'm Trudy Krisher, your host for the next half hour. And the mission of the Writer's Nook is to bring you, the viewer, some interesting conversations about writing, reading, literacy, and above all, the enjoyment of the written word. I am delighted to have on the show today someone whom I think you'll find it makes a very lively guest. This is T.J. Turner, and we're featuring his new book called Lincoln's Bodyguard. Welcome to the Writer's Nook, T.J.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.
I'm glad to have you. Now, I want to start with, there have been literally hundreds of books written about the Civil War.
Absolutely.
I guess the best known is Gone with the Wind. You could start there and move on. This is a Civil War
book. And I've read every single one of them.
I know you have, and me too, you know. But it's a popular subject. No one ever seems to get tired of reading about the Civil War.
No, not at all.
Tell us what is unique about your book.
Okay, so my book, like you're saying, is set right in the end of the Civil War. It's a historical fiction, but as you quickly find out on the first page, it's actually a work of alternative history. Alternative history
for our viewers. What does that mean, alternative history?
So I've taken history as we know it, and I did a little perturbation to it. We come off and history changes for about 7 years, and I write it. And so it's told from the perspective of the bodyguard who saves Abraham Lincoln in Ford's Theater on April 14, 1865.
So, in other words, Lincoln is not killed
at
Ford's
That's right.
Theater on April 14th,
It's a what if Lincoln had lived and survived the end of the Civil War.
Good. Well, there's some interesting history wrapped into this story. People probably don't think about it, but what historically do you think would have happened outside of the bounds of your novel? What historically would have happened to the nation had Lincoln lived?
Sure, yeah. I think this is something that historians have postulated a lot. Jay Winnick has a great book called April 1865.
I've read that book.
Isn't fantastic?
He is so good.
The subtitle is "It's the Month That Saved America," and he's absolutely right. Like you read his book and how he goes over it, and it's amazing, because that is truly the beginning of the end of the Civil War. Things have been going downhill for the Confederacy, but you get Robert E. Lee surrendering on April 9th, 1865, and then as it's starting to look like it's winding down, Abraham Lincoln goes to Ford's Theater for a night of relaxation, and it takes a very different turn from what it might have been. And if you look at the history and what was going on then, Lee had just surrendered, but there were still about 175,000 Confederate troops in play south of Virginia.
Were these Joseph Johnson's troops?
Joe Johnston's troops he had about 90,000 with a significant number of cavalry, and the Jefferson Davis, the president of the Confederacy, had issued orders to both to Joe Johnston and to Robert E. Lee to continue the fight as a guerrilla warfare. And so if he had done that, we may have had a very different nation.
It's hard for me to imagine that the war wouldn't have ended and it would end up in all these guerrilla conflicts. You think about Mosby's Raiders and all these, desperados and kind of, diehard Southerners and all that would just, hole up in the mountains and come out and attack people. And that might have gone on for a significant amount of time.
Oh, absolutely. You look at the terrain of the Confederacy, it's just littered with swamps and forests and mountains and rolling hills, and they could have bogged down a much larger force. And I've spent time in Afghanistan fighting an insurgency, and it doesn't take much to bog down a much larger force with a very small number of people.
We'll get back to the Afghanistan in just a second, because that's interesting. Because you've been in Afghanistan, you understand what that kind of guerrilla warfare would have been like. And definitely,
Sure, yeah. A little bit. And I don't think anyone truly understands it, but you've seen it firsthand a little bit.
Yeah. What else would have been different had Lincoln lived?
So what I postulate is that Joe Johnston decides with his troops to form a loose band of rebellion that keeps the North bogged down in the South with a lot of troops. And because of that, you get this system where the South doesn't get to fully reintegrate back into the country.
Yeah.
So they're not allowed to vote, and what happens is there's this rise of the industrial barons sort of another modern theme of getting corporations who rule
Sure.
politics.
Yeah.
And so they keep President Lincoln trapped in the presidency because he becomes sort of their figurehead, and they can keep getting him elected, and they essentially, through money and bribery, have control of Congress, get anything passed that they want.
That sounds familiar.
Yeah, absolutely.
It does.
Right? It
I
sort
mean,
of seems
still
like
relevant.
where we're kind of
Yeah.
at, or it's more, or it's taking a modern theme and putting it back in time a little bit. But from that, since you have to have such a large standing army down south to keep the rebellion squashed, the industrial barons still need labor. So what they enact is a system called the draft. It comes right out of the draft board from the Civil War, and instead of drafting men, what they do is they go and they draft the children from the former Confederacy, and they bring them north.
To work in the factories.
To work in the factories.
Oh my goodness!
And,
yes.
and they do it under the guise that they're going to send these kids back, and they'll be able to help the South with its industrialization after the war. But really, they're just using them as
slave labor.
Slave labor.
So that's
really.
ironic
Absolutely.
too, isn't it?
And then the Underground Railroad
Yeah.
runs in reverse, and the same Quakers and folks who would help escape slaves or helping children who escape the factories head back south to their
Very
families.
imaginative,
So-
very creative. How did you come up with this idea? I
It-
mean, were you stopped at a stoplight? Did you have downtime in Afghanistan? Were you in the shower? I mean, where did this come from?
Sure. So the whole concept of the book came from I've got two novels that sit in the closet that nobody's ever going to read, and
Amen.
yeah, that happens with all of us. And I was really close in that second novel. I had a couple agents go through it, and we're really close. They were like, well, humming and hawing about
Yeah.
signing me, and I had a great editor, freelance editor, who went through it, and he was doing this pro bono. He's a big editor from Little and Brown. And at the end, he said, you just need to move on and write something else. And that kind of got me depressed because I'd spent years
Sure,
on both books.
sure.
And you're like, oh, how am I going to justify this to the wife?
Yeah.
Particularly in the kids,
Yeah.
dad's up writing late at night. But I was driving home and sort of depressed about that. And Terry Gross I had Fresh Air on, and
Yeah.
Terry Gross was talking, and she had something about presidential assassinations or Lincoln, and she just said the line of, wouldn't it have been a different place if Lincoln had a real bodyguard that night? And so the title, Lincoln's Bodyguard, just kind of flashed in the head like a neon sign kind of going off. And I was like, wow, that's a really cool concept. Like, that'd be a great title for a book. And now it is. And
it's a great book. It's a great
thanks.
read. It's lots of fun.
And from there, I just started, the rest of that drive home was me trying to come up with, well, who would this guy be? And and at first, the imagination was, well, here's this guy who messed up so bad, and Lincoln did die in the first, and then I was like, no, it's got to be the guy who saves Lincoln, and it's
More
kind
of
of
a
flipped on
hero.
its head, and then he and Lincoln have this schism because Lincoln's actually kind of upset that he gets saved because he wants to kind of join the echelons of the founding fathers, and so he's almost denied his place in history because he gets
he's
saved. And so that's another theme
twist.
that kind of goes through the book. So
Interesting. Well, what kind of research did you have to do?
It most definitely extensive. The Civil War is something that I love growing up, and did a lot of work, research
What do you
on.
love about it? Because I had a father who loved the Civil War. I've gone to more battlefields than you want to. Can you imagine?
No,
But
it
at
still
any rate,
captures our imagination like nothing else, I think, in
Why, do
the
you
American
think?
fabric. But I think inarguably it's the most tumultuous time in our history, right? You had 700,000 Americans killed on both sides. It was brother against brother. It was crossed border. It had such themes of the liberation of the slaves and everything that happened, the expansion out west. All of these things kind of come together, and you have this immense conflict, and then how we healed from it, and it still echoes today, right?
It
with
does.
the civil rights movement and even the conflicts we've had recently with bringing down the
flag.
Confederate battle flag. So
Absolutely.
it's still with us today. It still shapes who we are as a country, and even where we're going. So it's there.
It'll never go away. That'll always be part of our fabric, like you say. You must have a love of history.
I do. Yeah.
How did this develop? Where does that come from?
That's a good question. I mean, I think it was just reading
Yeah.
as a kid. So getting into books and using them to escape into different worlds, and then then I found that I liked nonfiction as well. So and even today, I kind of read one nonfiction book, one fiction book. I like to alternate to kind of feel balanced. If I read too much fiction, I kind of
Well, you know, that's
feel unbalanced.
interesting because I like that balance of fiction and nonfiction, and I do feel like I'm writing some kind of balance that feels, I feel out of alignment if I read too much fiction, so I have to have, I don't know,
Absolutely.
it's like taking an Alka-Seltzer to make your system go back another way or something. What is that about? I don't know. Can you talk to that a little bit? The balance between fiction and nonfiction.
Well, and it's different, and certainly with some books, and the books I like the most, it kind of gets blurred. Like if you read Jay Winnick, or if you read Swanson's book on Manhunt, I mean, they really bring history alive. Anything written by McCullough, you know,
and they read like novels.
They do.
They do.
So it's and it's not even creative nonfiction at that point. They're very. It really is a nonfiction book, but yeah, there's definitely something about it because there's so much stuff that happens in real life that if you put into a novel, nobody would believe. They would say the coincidences are you know, that couldn't really happen.
You know,
but you actually read it.
You're onto something with that, because sometimes I think the things that do happen to real people in real life are more astonishing than the things that you would try to make up.
Certainly,
and,
yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
yeah, that's interesting. Okay, can you read us a little bit from the book?
Sure,
we
sure.
want to give the viewers a sense of what Lincoln's Bodyguard sounds like.
All right, no, fantastic. I'll read, and I'll start right from the very beginning.
Good.
So, there is a spoiler, but it is the spoiler that you get by learning that it's alternative history anyway.
Okay,
so.
good. So the spoiler is really not a spoiler.
No,
it's right
no,
there
not
on
really.
the cover,
It's
so
sort
you
of
know what you're getting.
the launch point for the whole novel.
Okay.
So. Death creeps quietly behind a man. This lesson I learned early in life, and on that April night, the old man learned it too. The audience below strained in their seats, desperate to glimpse the president. A single actor held center stage, his monologue bringing laughter, rising till it filled the theater. The gas lamps issued a constant hiss, luring me toward sleep. And the old man reached out to hold his wife's hand, then let go. As I stood along the back wall, obscured in flickering shadows against the dark wallpaper, a noise reached me. The old man's messenger talking to someone outside. The far door opened behind us, then closed. Footsteps followed down the short corridor of the vestibule. I readied myself. No need for a pistol at this range. I pulled my knife from its sheath. I waited as he opened the inner door and closed it, making no sound. He moved past me, placing each foot with deliberate purpose to keep the Florian silent. It confirmed his motive. Even with his dark suit and felt hat, I recognized him, his movement graceful and confident. He was a famous actor, the Hamlet of our day. I had seen him on stage before, other nights when I stood watch behind the old man in this theater. He paused, watching the play over the old man's head, like a man standing at a cliff, gathering courage to jump. I should have leapt, cut him down before he had the chance to strike, but I hesitated. When more laughter erupted from below, he drew a pistol in one hand, a knife in the other. As he lunged, I jolted to action. From my position, I had the advantage. Grabbing his shoulder, I spun him toward me. With my free hand, I gripped his gun while my knife tore through soft tissue, deflecting off bone. I drew him near, locked in a dance. For a moment, our eyes met. He had accounted for everything except this.
Wow.
And that's how it starts.
That is how it starts. And we never would have had James Swanson's Manhunt if it had happened like this.
or he would have written a different book. So.
He would have written a different book. There you
Absolutely.
go. Very nice. Thank you for doing that. I want to ask you just a little bit about your main character,
Oh, absolutely.
Joseph Foster. Tell our viewers what kind of a man he is and what you wanted readers to sort of understand about him as a character.
Certainly. So
He's your hero.
He is, and he's sort of a troubled hero, right? He's got his own demons that he's chasing. Obviously, in the prologue that I just read from is sort of where the novel takes off, and he comes back into the picture about 7 years later, trying to overcome this gap with President Lincoln. He's also a man. He's half Native American, half white American, and I did that on purpose. I wanted somebody who could blend in and out of the background, who conceivably, since it's alternative history, could be somebody who was there in real life and because he didn't do his job, was sort of just written out of history. So you could have conceived that he really would have been there.
But
he's
you wouldn't
also
have noticed.
Absolutely, but he's also somebody who fits into both worlds and doesn't fit into both worlds at the same time. So he gets a very unique perspective. By saving the president, he something happens to his family that haunts him, and so he's on a mission of redemption all the way around.
He has a story as well.
He
Yes,
absolutely does,
absolutely.
and that comes out little by little in
It does.
in the book
It
as
does.
it creeps
That
forward.
makes the book interesting. Well, let's talk a little bit about you.
Okay.
Now, I don't know if I have this right or not, but you strike me as somebody who is not a sit at your desk in a garret and write all day in the dark kind of guy. You strike me as kind of more of a man of action with a lot of experience behind you. Can you talk about those other things that you've done other than writing?
Sure. I'm in the military. Right? I'm still a reservist, an active reservist. I did.
Thank you for your service.
Oh, you're welcome.
Okay.
Very much. I did three combat tours in Afghanistan, so some of that comes into the novel as much as it can be in terms of the insurgency and having that conflict in the background. But yeah, no, I don't like to be bored, so I like to do a lot of different things and get out. I write when I feel like it. I don't have a set writing schedule per se. So.
Well, I want to know about those 3 tours in Afghanistan, because I heard that you jumped out of a helicopter and
I did.
in a hot landing zone and defused some kind of a IED Taliban. Tell me what that was. What happened when you jumped out of the helicopter and
so I've been on many missions, and sometimes we helo assault in places. So on the particular one, we actually got dropped off north of a village, and you had to get off the back of the bird quite fast, and it turned out to be a hot landing zone, but the weapon that was being used against us jammed, and so it was.
Boy, were you lucky.
Yeah, actually, I don't think hot landing zone may be a little bit of an overstatement because I don't think he even got any rounds off. They poorly maintained their weapons,
equipment.
So it was. I think they were panicking to get it loaded and couldn't, and then took off. But it could have been a very different landing if they had. So yeah, so
that's an exciting adventure.
And
how did you get your Bronze Star? What was that for?
So that was for my tour in Afghanistan in 2012 and 2013. So I'm there with a special mission unit, and we would go and track who was doing specific activities and go after them and try to put them in jail and put them into the Afghan legal system. So we put 16 members of the Taliban away and took 12 weapons caches off the battlefield.
Oh,
so
amazing!
It was a fun but stressful tour.
It must be. I mean, I don't know how you. It must put everything, a different perspective on things to have been through something like that.
Yeah, I think it does. When people try to kill you, sometimes
you think,
the stuff at home is like, you know what, this isn't so bad. My wife gets upset at me sometimes that I don't have enough,
Yeah,
I kind of
the kids are yelling a little bit. That's a small thing. That's funny. I want to know a little bit about the teddy bears.
Sure.
I read that you wrote an essay that was broadcast on NPR about the power of teddy bears, and that came out of your Afghanistan tour.
It did. It came out of my first one back in 2006.
Tell us about the teddy bears.
Sure. So it's 2006. I did a different job then, and I didn't get outside the wire a lot. I did a bunch of convoy operations, but we had just done a convoy up into the Panjshir Valley. It's just absolutely beautiful, beautiful place in Afghanistan. And we had brought a lot of humanitarian aid with us, and I had a bag full of teddy bears, and so I got to hand them out.
You got them where? At a Walmart somewhere?
No,
how does a teddy bear appear in Afghanistan? I just think, okay.
They were sent. A lot of times we get families from service members will send things because they know that we're encountering kids and pens and notebooks and such. Good. And then I happen to have a bag of soccer balls and teddy bears, and there was one particular incident. There was a little girl, and her looked like her grandfather was with her, and they were walking in the snow, and they looked kind of downtrodden. And I had this teddy bear, and I actually got to kind of run down this little hill to be able to give it to her, and it just, like, the look on her face, like, lit, she wasn't expecting to get anything. And when you see these kids, they don't generally have any toys at all or anything like that. So just getting an object like that was just you could just see the kind of joy in her face. That's what I see on my kids' face, right? They're people just like us, and same hopes and dreams and desires.
How did that become a piece that then was broadcast on NPR? How did that happen?
I don't remember exactly, other than This I Believe essay series was on, and so I just took my hand at trying to write.
You believed in teddy bears.
Yeah, and it was really from that one incident, from that one mission up north, and so it was it was my first thing that got written and published. So
That's awesome.
Kind of nice,
Well,
and then read on
great.
NPR. So.
Can I ask you a little bit? I don't know if you're, it's a secret or, what kind of clearance you have, but I understand you're a research scientist now for the
yes.
Air Force.
That's my civilian
What
job.
do you do, or can you say?
Oh yeah, no, I
Okay.
do high energy X-ray diffraction microscopy. So I
What
go to a
is that?
synchrotron and I look at how metal deforms and how the stresses are distributed inside, so that we can try to make better models to life our components, so that our planes fly longer and their components are
Okay.
made stronger and designed smarter.
And how do you know how to do that? Do you have an engineering degree
I
or
do.
background? Okay.
Yeah, I've got it's a long way from writing, I guess, but I'm an engineer, and both my bachelor's and my PhD were in engineering. So
So you have a PhD in engineering,
I do.
and you write novels, and you distribute teddy bears, and you jump out of helicopters. Hey,
I don't like to be bored,
I
so
mean,
I try to
that's
keep.
just
try to
pretty
keep
cool.
balance, so,
That's
yeah.
just very, very cool. And I understand that you're very involved with the Antioch Writers Workshop, which those of us who are writers in this area are so
absolutely.
proud of. I mean, that's a program that's nourished writers for decades now. And apparently you are going to be voted as the president of the board because you're running unopposed.
That's right.
But you've been the vice president.
I have been, yeah.
And what kind of plans do you have for the Antioch Writers Workshop in the future?
Oh, really? I just want to. The organization's gone through some amazing growth over the last couple of years, and really staying the course and making certain that we're responsive to the writers who come, the kind of things they want to see in the programs. We have an amazing executive director in Sharon Short, and she does a wonderful, wonderful job. So, really, I just try to stay out of her way and help her wherever she needs it, and that's my biggest plan.
Very good.
So.
Okay. I wanted to share with you a little bit. This is the tradition from Ruth Ann Peck. She always ends the show with a quote that seems to sum up, the sense we have of the writer. You've had so many varied life experiences in addition to novel writing. So here's this is a quote from Ray Bradbury. He says, quote, "Just write every day of your life, read intensely, and then see what happens."
Absolutely.
So, I think with those many and varied experiences, you've been able to sort of see what happens.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
great
Thank you so much for being a guest today. We've enjoyed having you. I know our viewers will love hearing your story. They also should feel free to tune into the Writer's Nook whenever it's being broadcast. And if they would like to contact me with people that they would like to see on the show, I can be reached at www.trudykrisherauthor.com. And we hope to hear from viewers. And thank you so much, TJ.
Thanks for having me. Thanks so much.
It was great.
Yeah, it's
thank
good talking to you.